Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, where I'm practicing law now for 24 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often write about the stuff for places like Jalopnik, Opposite Lock, and Road and Track. Today we're going to talk about the widespread problems with the Ford Focus and Fiesta transmissions. I've been hearing about these since 2011, and normally I don't do shows specifically about one particular car or one particular car problem, but number one, this is an extremely widespread problem, and number two, there's a lesson we can all learn from this. So if you own a Ford Focus or a Ford Fiesta, you know what I'm talking about, but if you don't, I can tell you about it. Here's the deal. I've rented a car before that was a Ford Focus or a Ford Fiesta. I forgot which one it was. I think it was a Focus. And I got in the car and I'm driving along and I noticed the transmission slipping. And I'd go to get away from a light and the engine would rev up and then all of a sudden the transmission would catch. And a few times it would harsh shift like that, and sometimes it would just slip, and it was just the weirdest thing. And I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or not. Who knows, these modern cars. And I picked up my brother, we were driving along, and he goes, "Why do you keep doing that?" And I go, "Doing what?" And he goes, "You're not doing that on purpose?" And I go, "No." I go, "It's just the transmission." And so here's the deal. In about 2011, Ford switched over to a thing called a PowerShift transmission. It's a dual clutch transmission. It's got some funky things going on inside of it. I don't even pretend to know what it is. But in 2011, they put this in the Ford Fiesta, I believe. Then starting in 2012, they put it in the Ford Focus as well. And I started getting phone calls in 2011 from people saying, "I got this Ford product and the transmission is screwed up." And I started getting the phone call over and over again from different people with different cars. Okay, they all had a Ford Focus or a Ford Fiesta. And it was kind of bizarre because what they would say happened was, the car would behave like this. They would take it into the dealership, and the first time they brought it in, they'd be told, "Oh, we just need to reprogram your transmission control module. Your TCM needs to be reflashed or reprogrammed or some such." And they would do something and give it back to them. Second time they brought it in, they'd say, "Oh, your transmission control module needs to be replaced. We need to replace the whole darn thing." So they'd replace the transmission control module, give it back to them. It would still keep doing it. And they'd say, "Okay, the third time you brought it in," they'd say, "Well, we have to break open your transmission, find out what's going on. There's something, wrong inside of it." And that, of course, wouldn't fix it either. And when you brought it back the fourth time, they'd say, "There's nothing wrong with it." I'm not kidding you. And you go, "Wait, the first three times you threw parts of the problem, the fourth time you say there's nothing wrong with it?" And I suspect they were doing it because they recognized that the fourth failed repair attempt in most states triggers a lemon law claim. So a lot of my clients came to me and said, "Last time I brought it in, they just simply refused to work on it, said there's no problem found, or it's operating as designed," which is silly. So we filed lawsuits on this starting back in 2011, 2012, 2013. I was kind of wondering how long it would be before Ford solved the problem. And oddly, they didn't for the longest time. And now I've been doing this stuff for 24 years, lemon law, and I've seen cars before that had widespread problems. And I can tell you back in the day, the Dodge Neon had a problem with its transmission. I remember a particular make and model of truck that had a problem with brakes. There's currently another truck on the road that's got a problem with the rear end and a vibration at certain speeds. But I've never seen one this widespread over this many cars as the Ford Focus and the Ford Fiesta. And like I said, starting in 2011, and I'm still getting these calls today. I got one yesterday, and yesterday was a Saturday. Seriously, I get these calls all the time. So as you can imagine, number one, class action lawsuits were filed. Some different attorneys around the country have filed class action lawsuits on behalf of all people who own these cars. And if you got a notice about that, you might want to pay attention to it. It may or may not affect your rights. And there have been a bunch of other things, though. And one of the things I always tell people is that if you want to find out how widespread a problem is, go to the NHTSA website, NHTSA, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and they track complaints and technical service bulletins and recalls. And so if people complain about a particular make and model of a car, and you can do this, it's got a pull-down menu, and you can find out based on make, model, year, and component what's wrong with a particular car in terms of how many people have complained about it. So if you go, as you might imagine, to NHTSA today and look up your make, model, and year of Ford Focus or Fiesta, if it's built 2011 or later, you're going to find rafts and rafts of complaints about people who are describing exactly what you're experiencing, and that is a harsh shifting and or slipping transmission. It's just thousands of complaints. Somebody at change.org started a petition trying to get Ford to do something about this. But what's been fascinating to me is that if you look at the technical service bulletins, that's the documents that Ford issues to the manufacturer, or from the manufacturer to the dealerships, explaining to them how they might want to try fixing the vehicle. They recognize there is a problem, and they're clearly floundering. They're just thrashing around, throwing different ideas at this problem. And I believe, I just checked one of them, I think it's a 2011 Ford Fiesta. It's got something like 19 TSBs addressing the transmission. 19. So if you have never brought your car in before for this problem and you bring it in for the first time, some poor technician at the Ford dealership's got to yank out 19 technical service bulletins. And by the way, some of them supersede previous ones, so he might not have to do all 19 of them. But he's got to go through all of them and find out how many apply to your car and then see which ones may or may not make any sense at all. Now, like I said before, this is what they call a dual clutch transmission. And now, I'm not a transmission guy. I'm not an expert on transmissions. I mean, I know how to work one. I've driven a clutch. I've driven a manual, in a regular car. I've driven one in a truck. I've told you about tow truck stories. One of the tow trucks I drove had a clutch in it. I had an army truck that had a big old clutch in it. And of course, I've got vehicles with automatics in them as well. So I know a little bit about how they work and so on, but this is a dual clutch transmission, which they describe as being, in essence, a manual transmission that's being shifted automatically. And the reason I know that is I did some research on this before I started doing the podcast, and I found an article written by a journalist for Automotive News. And Automotive News is a trade journal aimed at car dealers and people in the car industry. And this car journalist said, hey, Ford's got this problem with the dual clutch. And it's comical. He actually said, I drove one, and those things operate as they're supposed to. Now, he drove one that was operating properly. And he said, yeah, it had some funny shifts, but but people just aren't used to it. And he actually chalked up all of the consumer complaints to consumers not understanding how the transmission worked. And I'm here to tell you that guy is completely 100% wrong. The vehicle I test drove, that was the rental car that I drove, it was not shifting as normal. It was not shifting the way it was supposed to shift. The engine would like I said, it would rev, and then it would slip into gear, then it would slam. There's no way that's how it was designed to run. And one of the other reasons we know that these transmissions are defective is they did not run this way from the factory. In other words, these consumers would take these vehicles for test drives and they run perfectly. They ran normally. They shifted normally. So you're going to buy a brand new Ford Focus or Ford Fiesta. You take it for a test drive and it runs perfectly fine. It runs perfectly fine. You buy the car, and within a month, within 2 months, within 6 months, it's different for each one apparently, but somewhere down the road it changes and it starts shifting poorly. And now, one of the reasons that they keep talking about changing the transmission control module or reflashing it is that the thinking is that somehow the program has got out of whack. And it turns out that's not the problem. Based on the recent technical service bulletins and the recent documentation from Ford, they finally figured out that some of these vehicles, the way they're designed and during operation, transmission fluid actually leaks into them from someplace and gets on one or two of the clutches, and the oily clutch is what's causing the vehicle to have that harsh shift. So you aren't imagining it, and when the automotive journalist tells you you're wrong, you're not. He's wrong. He simply drove one that was operating correctly. And like I told you, I drove one that was operating incorrectly. I've had clients who've gotten these cars, driven them for 50,000 miles, and then the transmission went kaplooey. I've had other clients who bought it, drove it for a couple of weeks, and then it went nuts. And that's apparently the problem, is it depends on at what point that defect happens that gets the transmission fluid into the system that somehow then gets on the clutch. And again, I admit I'm not a transmission expert. I'm simply repeating what I read in some technical service bulletins and some articles written on this, but it comports with everything I've seen and heard about these vehicles. I've only driven one, but I've spoken to hundreds of people who've got them. And I know there's thousands and thousands more across America. Like I said, they've filed class action lawsuits. They've had change.org petitions. And they've complained to everybody under the sun, called attorneys, called Ford, sent angry letters to Ford. And like I said, up until recently, Ford, they said, well, we'll work on the vehicle as best we can, but we don't think there's anything wrong with it. But they did throw parts at it, and then they would stop working on it. Well, very, very recently, Ford has finally said, something, we think we've got a fix for this, and we admit it's a defect. They finally have admitted that they have a defect in these transmissions. So what they have done is they've sent letters out, and if you own one of these cars, hopefully you've gotten this letter. I have a client who called me last week. He said he got this letter last week, but I saw references to this letter going out perhaps last year, so that'd be half a year ago. So if you own one of these cars, you should have gotten a letter saying that Ford is going to extend your warranty out to 7 years or 100,000 miles, depending whichever one came first, okay? 7 years or 100, and that is an extension above and beyond what that original warranty probably was. I think it came with a 5-year, 60,000 mile warranty on the powertrain. So they just pushed it back 2 years and or 40,000 miles, whichever comes first. That's a good deal. And Ford has also issued a new technical service bulletin that explains to the mechanics what they're allowed to do to fix this, and that involves apparently cracking open the transmission and looking to see if the clutches are wet, and if they are, replacing them, and then fixing whatever's leaking to get the fluid on the clutch. So they will have to work on this thing to fix it, but once they've fixed it, like I said, it's got an extended warranty that's been pushed out even further. Now, this doesn't necessarily resolve all your issues or make you happy if you had one of these vehicles till now and you brought it in 4 times for repairs, and the 4th time they told you were crazy. Nothing can heal that. Don't you just hate that? You bring a vehicle into the dealership and they go, there's nothing wrong with it. Oh, I just felt like spending the day at the dealership because I had nothing better to do. Of course there's something wrong with it. Why do you think I brought it back? Okay, so they will have to work on it, and they might be able to fix it. That's the good news. And they've extended the warranty for you, which is also good news. Now, if you own one of these cars and you've not gotten that letter, okay, it might be they sent it to you and you dismissed it as junk mail because that's what these letters look like. Call Ford. Go get your owner's manual, open up the back page. It'll say if you have problems with your warranty service, call this number, call that number. Finally, it'll say call us, and it'll give you a number where you can call. Call Ford's consumer helpline, whatever the heck they call it, and ask them, by the way, I've got one of these cars, the transmission's shot. I've been complaining about it. I can't get anybody to help me. I understand that you guys might have an extended service warranty on this, or an extended warranty on this, and possibly a fix. Is that something I can look forward to? And hopefully they'll say, yeah, we sent you a letter, you just didn't get it. Or, gee, somehow we missed that, we'll send you the letter now, okay? So get yourself that letter because you need to have an extended service length on your vehicle. Number 1, because you might want to get it fixed. Number 2, if you go to sell the vehicle, I believe it'll transfer, and that'll help you sell that vehicle. And if it doesn't, of course, Ford can pay for that in a class action, because I'm sure that's going to be one of the claims, is a diminution in value of the vehicles with the defective transmissions. So there's an extremely important lesson here for all of us, not just people who own the Ford Focus built after 2011 or the Ford Fiesta 2012 or later. But here's the deal. When you buy a new vehicle, number 1, pay attention if it's got any newfangled technology on it. And this vehicle did have a dual clutch, which was a newfangled technology at the time. It should have had slightly different operating characteristics, as described by the automotive journalists who said that theirs ran okay. Slightly different, okay? Just like the Tesla with its autopilot, okay? The vehicle's got a different operating characteristic. Understand that, study it, learn about it, look on the internet, do what you can. And anybody who's buying a Ford Focus or Fiesta in 2014 could have simply run a search on that term, i.e. Ford Focus or Ford Fiesta, on YouTube, and you would have found dozens of videos of people who had videotaped, with their cell phones, the cars shifting harshly and shifting poorly. And then if that had triggered you to do some more research, you would have discovered, hey, these cars have all got bad transmissions, okay? But, the information is out there. So be aware of the things that are different about your car. If your car has got some new technology on it, the new technology might cause the car to handle or work differently. Be aware of it. But the flip side of that is, don't let that be an excuse for the dealership or the manufacturer to simply tell you, there's nothing wrong with your vehicle. That's how it's supposed to operate. If the dual clutch transmission was actually supposed to operate the way mine did in the rental car I got, I'm telling you right now that Ford could just close up shop and go out of business, okay? There's no way that they would intentionally put a car on the road and tell people it's normal when it shifted that badly. I mean, I thought it wasn't in the right gear. I thought maybe I hit the gear shift. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it would actually mess with your head. You hit the gas, the car doesn't go. And then all of a sudden it takes off and and then it jerks into second gear. There's no way a car company could do that for any length of time and expect that, yes, we're going to make a profit, we're going to thrive as an automaker in North America. It wouldn't work. It would not be a business model that anybody would endorse, okay? So when they tell you the problem is normal, don't believe them. Study it and find out if it's normal. But the key is to keep going back, keep complaining, and make sure your complaints are written up. So when you take your vehicle into the dealership and say, it's got a problem, and they say, no, it doesn't, say, at least document that I was here. The good news is most of my clients had repair orders for the first 3 repair attempts, and they often had a 4th one that said operating normally, no problem found. But they've got the documentation to prove they were there. Like I said, don't let that be the end of the story. I know there are people out there, particularly of the older generations, who tend to believe people in authority. So if a person at a dealership wearing a tie says, hey, there's nothing wrong with your car, there are people that say, oh, I guess there's nothing wrong with my car. And then you drive it home and the transmission is jerking all over the place. Okay, there's something wrong with your car. You know it better than they do because you live with it on a daily basis. So that's an important lesson for you to learn, okay? Regardless of whether you bought a Ford Focus or Ford Fiesta or something else, okay? You're not crazy. If you think there's something wrong with your car, there probably is. If you take it back to the dealership, they say we can't work on it, take it to a different dealership. Every car maker out there allows you to take your car to any dealership that's an authorized repair facility of that manufacturer, regardless of where you bought your car. You'll get better service where you bought your car, probably, but you can always take it to another dealer and try that. And eventually, if you get shot down too many times and they can't fix it, contact an attorney who does lemon law. Hey, I don't know where you can find one, but there might be one out there, you never know. Okay, so again, that's the problem with the Ford Focus beginning in 2012 and the Ford Fiesta beginning in 2011. If you've got one and you thought it was shifting badly, congratulations, you're not crazy. It did, in fact, have a problem, which Ford now admits is a problem. They think they have a fix for it, so call them up, follow up on that. And likewise, there's an extension on the warranty you can get for 7 years, 100,000 miles. Make sure you've got documentation for that as well. Questions or comments, as always, shoot them my way. LehtosLaw.com is my website, LEHTOSLAW.com. I'm on Twitter at Steve Lehto, at STEVELEHTO. And this show is on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and probably all kinds of other places I don't know about, and YouTube. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye-bye.